Welcome to this new automotive news video for Saturday, June 6, 2026. Today we're going to talk about the Renault Twingo Electric, which has just come out and is already facing a new, particularly troublesome problem. We'll also discuss a surprising discovery that could let millions of diesel engines run longer than expected, and Brembo's new technology that might make current braking systems obsolete. I hope the topics I've chosen for you today will interest you. If that's the case, as usual, I'm counting on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for future videos, and boosting this one if the option appears for you. And of course, also by leaving a comment where you share your thoughts on today's news and maybe even share your own stories about the Renault Twingo. Maybe you're among the first in France to get an electric Twingo and want to share your experience. Perhaps you face the issues we'll discuss. Or maybe everything is fine for you. If so, feel free to mention it. We're going to start this video by talking about the new electric Renault Twingo, which is facing a new problem. I say new problem because actually, we've already talked about the electric Twingo in another video. At the time when the first customers who received their cars were discovering, with shock and a lot of disappointment, that the 263 kilometer range was almost never achievable. Most importantly, they bought a car that lacked versatility. Remember, at the time, people were talking about the fact that with its consumption on the highway at 130 km/h, it was only capable of 95 km of range on the highway, which is really tiny. That may have been fine years ago, but with electric cars now offering 600 km highway range, it looks pretty bad. At the time, the main issue was communication and marketing, as most customers complained that dealerships hadn't properly informed them about the vehicle's real range. Not that there was an actual defect. Here, we're talking instead about a design flaw that couldn't really be noticed before, since we had to wait for it to get hot to realize it. We had to wait for the good seasons to arrive, the nice days, temperatures over 30 degrees to realize there was another mechanical problem this time. What happened is that to save every penny, Renault made a very particular technical choice for this Renault Twingo Electric. In order to reduce both the costs and the weight of the vehicle, Renault gave up on a liquid cooling system for the battery, which is the case on, let's say, 95 to 99% of current electric cars, and instead put in an air cooling system. It's a compromise that works perfectly for urban use, but it quickly becomes a problem on the highway, both in hot weather and when the car is really used at 130 km/h nonstop. In those cases, the vehicle's air cooling system is not suitable for the temperatures the batteries can reach. In the best cases, it can simply completely limit the battery's charging speed, because for safety reasons, the battery will actually prevent fast charging. Fast charging, that's not actually that fast. Just to remind you, on the Twingo, unless I'm mistaken, fast charging is done at 50 kilowatt. That's really not much for a new electric car in 2026. Many brands now offer 350 kilowatt. Some European brands even offer 600 kilowatt. And Chinese brands go up to 1,000 kilowatt. That's 20 times faster. When conditions are ideal and the car is cooled, Renault says this charging speed lets you go from 15 to 80% in just 30 minutes. Remember, we talked about the fact that if you go from 0 to 100 with the charging speed curve, it's more like around 45 minutes or even an hour. Since the battery heats up a lot and only uses air cooling, it can't regulate its temperature. It limits the battery's charging speed to prevent a potential fire, and the charging time is simply doubled. That means going from 10 to 80% takes almost an hour. And apparently, according to various tests you can find here and there on the internet, going from 0 to 100 in these conditions takes around an hour to an hour and a half. And that's just the minor problem. Because the bigger problem is that when the car overheats, error messages can simply appear on the dashboard that prevent you from restarting, or at least keep you from driving normally. Messages about electrical failure or battery charging issues. And finally, another problem that comes up is that the solution to debug the car and get it back to normal use could almost be accessible to anyone. That's not true due to another technical decision by Renault. When the car overheats and an error message appears like that, the best way to remove the error message and get back on the road normally is to disconnect and reconnect the 12-volt battery, an operation that is almost impossible, at least outside of a workshop, since accessing this battery requires being able to open the hood at the front of the vehicle. A hood that was designed so that drivers can't open it. To be able to open the hood, you need certain proprietary tools from Renault that allow you to remove several accessories from the vehicle, which then lets you take off the hood, disconnect the battery, and reconnect it. If this happens at a highway rest area, it's simply impossible to fix it yourself. It's a shame for Renault because this is a pretty highly anticipated model, and its early days have been much less satisfying and much less promising in the end than the early days of the Renault 5 Electric, which went by with far fewer problems. And once again, it's a shame to end up with vehicles that have problems like this, electronic issues, or reliability problems that really come from the brand's desire to cut costs. If Renault hadn't tried to save money on cooling or the hood's glass, we likely wouldn't be in this situation. In any case, it's necessary for Renault to react quickly to fix this problem, whether it's a software solution or a mechanical one. Because, well, we're heading into summer, when potentially thousands of French people will be receiving their Twingo. And, well, it will simply be impossible for them to reach their vacation destination. Well, at least if they take the highway, but honestly, who wants to slog through a 700-kilometer trip on the highway at 80? Let me know in the comments. Fortunately, not all today's news is this concerning. While some drivers are already discovering the limits of the new Twingo, a totally unexpected discovery could this time give hope back to millions of motorists. As more and more restrictions target diesel vehicles, a discovery could very well change the future of millions of motorists. For several years now, diesel has seemed doomed. Between the ZDF ever stricter environmental standards and the consequences of Dieselgate, many thought this type of engine had no future left. No future at all. But researchers have just made a major breakthrough that could completely change the game. It comes from a team at RUDN University, which is a Russian university, and they managed to run a diesel engine on pure rapeseed oil without using traditional diesel fuel, and most importantly, and this is the key difference compared to fuels like oleosin, which are already existing fuels made from rapeseed oil, they do require chemical processing. Here, we're really talking about using pure rapeseed oil in modern diesel engines without that rapeseed oil undergoing any chemical transformation at all. Instead of chemically modifying the fuel, this university chose to work on the engine itself. What would need to be modified on a modern diesel engine so that it can run on rapeseed oil without being damaged, while keeping all the usual advantages of a diesel engine? Namely its robustness, range, and low fuel consumption. And they found that by electronically reprogramming the adapted vehicle, slightly increasing the volume of the combustion chamber, and modifying the shape of the piston bowl, well, it worked. And it actually worked pretty well because while maintaining the performance of the diesel engine they tested on, they found an overconsumption of 5%. But that's not a big deal, since raw rapeseed oil currently costs half as much as a liter of diesel. So it would potentially be interesting economically, but it's also potentially interesting environmentally, since by using this pure rapeseed oil, measured fine particle emissions were reduced by 80%. So to sum up the situation, it would mean vehicles that normally keep their performance and reliability, that consume just a little bit more with a fuel that's almost half the price and 80% less pollutant emissions. Unfortunately, it's a bit like all the innovations that have been made in recent months with different alternative fuels. It works very, very well on a small scale. But the challenge is moving from the experimental phase where it works well to industrialization and commercialization, so it becomes the norm. And there, well, it's a race against time because on the other side, there's the 2035 agenda from the European Commission to stop combustion engines. And for now, there's still only a very small margin left for alternative fuels, which this one is ultimately a part of. So there are a little less than 10 years left for this kind of technology to prove its effectiveness. And above all, to set up all the necessary infrastructure for its use. And that's not a sure thing. And finally, here's perhaps the most fascinating innovation of the day. Brembo has just unveiled a technology that could make an element present in almost all cars for over 100 years obsolete. That element is brake fluid. Because in fact, since the 1920s, the way brakes work hasn't changed much. It still relies on the same principle. That is, when the driver presses the brake pedal, a piston puts the brake fluid under pressure. In the circuit, fluid circulates to the wheels, activating calipers that squeeze the brake discs to slow the vehicle. It's a proven, reliable system that works well, but its basic operation has changed very little over the decades. And today, Brembo wants to change that with this new system called Sun-Sci-Fi, a system they presented several years ago, but now it's finally entering the industrialization and production phase. It's a brake-by-wire technology that completely eliminates traditional hydraulic components. Basically, there's no more brake fluid, not even a circuit for any kind of fluid. Instead, it's electric motors that directly control the brake calipers, thanks to software that constantly analyzes the pressure applied to the pedal, the speed of the wheels, and the behavior of the vehicle, in order to precisely determine the force to apply to each wheel. This eliminates the need for a brake fluid system and also delivers impressive performance. Because where a traditional hydraulic circuit needs between 300 and 500 milliseconds to be fully activated, the Brembo Sun-Sci-Fi technology claims only 80 milliseconds. That means, let's say, 3, 4, or even 5 times less. A considerable difference that could improve the responsiveness, precision, and efficiency of braking. Sun-Sci-Fi was unveiled a few years ago, but now it's finally happening. American automaker Lucid will be the first to use this Sun-Sci-Fi system, on its Air Dream Edition sedan. Probably others will follow. The big question is, will customers trust this kind of system? Because it's true that when something works well, even if it's not ultra technologically advanced, well, why always replace it? So that's it for today's news, right? I hope you found the video interesting. If that's the case, I'm counting on you to show your support as usual by leaving a like, subscribing, and maybe using the join button below this video. I'll see you tomorrow for the last video of the week. Bye.